Alrighty fellas, it is time to take a look at my first ever MACK thrill coaster, Blue Fire Megacoaster, located in Europa-Park in Rust, Germany. This is my first and currently over MACK Rides Launch Coaster, and it was also the first one ever built, with it being from the year of 2009. The ride is a compact blue twist machine with 4 inversions featuring 20 riders per train, and it is one of my personal favorite launch coasters as of the upload of this video. In today's review, I will go through 7 different categories which are meant to describe Blue Fire's potential, while also giving a score out of 10 in each category. Then I will finish off with an average between the 7 scores to give Blue Fire a final overall grade. Before getting into how good the coaster is, however, we will take a quick look at its stats. Blue Fire stands at 124.7 feet tall with its largest turnaround, while being 3,464.5 feet long, making it a decently length ride, while it also has a good but shortly experienced top speed of 62.1 miles an hour, which it reaches via an LSM launch system in 2.5 seconds. The first category is appearance, where I judge the coaster on how good I think it looks, since that can often have an impact on its presentation and how much people want to ride it. The ride itself looks intimidating since it has its big vertical loop right in the middle of the ride, and it looks awesome. The support structure and the lower track going around it also looks amazing, and with the beautiful blue and silver color scheme, the ride's appearance is flat out awesome and really good and impressive looking. I personally think it deserves a 10 out of 10 for how it looks, as I simply can't think of a single flaw in its presentation. Next up is the long one. This is the G-forces category. How intense is this ride? Many people who have ridden this coaster tend to call this ride somewhat forceless and boring, so that was what I expected when I was going into it. But to my surprise, this ride actually pulls some pretty good G's and is rather intense in some sections. To start off with, you go through an LSM launch, and while many usually criticize MACK rides for having weak launches, I think Blue Fire would be an exception, because I actually thought this was a pretty good launch. Before launching, you hold completely still, and when it starts, it does so very suddenly and really shoves you, making it feel very surprising, and the entire launch itself actually has some good push to it. It's far from the strongest launch I've experienced, but it's also far from the weakest. Next up, you go into a very weird, very tall turnaround, which has some force going into it and out of it. At the top, you also experience a little bit of hang time, but not for the longest time. Then you hit the most iconic part of the ride, the biggest vertical loop I have tried. Unfortunately, you only get force right at its bottom. Throughout the rest of it, you don't really get much force or hang time. Right after it, however, you hit a Stengel dive, which has some really good whip to it and intensity as well, and you then head upwards into the mid-course brake run. The special thing about the transition into the brake run is that it's not banked at the end of it, meaning that you get pushed to the left at the top of the hill, providing you with smooth and really nice laterals. Now, when I rode this coaster, I rode it in the middle and near the front, so I never got to experience airtime into or out of the brake run, which riders claim is near the back. So for me, I can say that for most riders, there won't really be any airtime. After the mid-course, you head into the twisted horseshoe roll, which is a mix of 2 0G rolls and a turn between them. The rolls give some good whip, and the turn between them also has some decent force. The next element is a twisted airtime hill, but once again, it doesn't really do much. It is, however, made up for because after a forgettable turnaround, you hit one of the most intense inversions I have ever experienced. The finale of Blue Fire is a Heartline roll, which is so fast, its strong laterals manage to turn into powerful ejector airtime as well, throwing you out of your seat as strongly as the comfortable MACK restraints allow you to. This is definitely my favorite inversion on any coaster I've done, and it really helps with Blue Fire's fun factor. In general, Blue Fire's forces are mainly average, while there are also a few dead spots, and a few intense spots. But because of how good those spots are, I am willing to give Blue Fire a score of 7 for overall intensity. Next up is smoothness. Blue Fire Megacoaster is an overall smooth ride experience, which doesn't really suffer from roughness in any way. It isn't butter smooth, but it doesn't really have any smoothness problems either. It does have a little rattle here and there, but that's it overall. And shortly said, an 8 out of 10 is what I felt like the coaster deserved when I did my first ride. When it comes to ride time, where I judge the coaster on how long the ride feels, I think Blue Fire has a pretty decent length. It's not really a long ride, and a lot of the pacing is killed early on with the turnaround, vertical loop, and especially the mid-course brake run, but it doesn't really feel so short either. It could at least be worse. Still, it does suffer from the fact that it could have done more with 62 miles an hour, but it was also the prototype, so making it super long was not a good idea to begin with, when you don't even know how the ride is going to work out. Overall, I think a 4 is good for Bluefire. The length is fine, but a little more would be very greatly appreciated. Now, Europa-Park is known for their great theming, both throughout the park itself and on its many rides. Bluefire is no exception. The ride is themed to a laboratory in Iceland, since it's located in the Iceland section of the park. Now, I'm not 100% sure of what kind of laboratory it is, but I know it's something dangerous, because in the room where you launch from, you see a bunch of pipes, lights, and scientists, and right before you launch you hear a scientist say sorry while alarms go off. I love a good pre-show, and this one is very complete. The station and queue lines are also pretty decently themed, and they make it feel like you are in the setting. The rock work is meant to replicate the Icelandic nature, and it works very well with the ride, especially since it works as near-miss elements, and that very much goes for the tunnel right after the tall turnaround, which is such a good head chopper. I was flat out terrified to keep my arms up doing the tunnel. I'll be honest, it's not one of my favorite personal themes, but when it comes to the execution and how good the theming is overall, I'll give Bluefire an 8 out of 10. For the amount of theming as well as its intensity. Next up is originality, where Bluefire Megacoaster will be judged on how innovative MACK rides were. Bluefire was the first of its model, a MACK Rides Launch Coaster. However, when it comes to what the model does, there are certainly similarities to other existing roller coasters. Most people will probably compare the MACK Launch Coaster to the Blitz model by Swiss manufacturer Intamin, and I will also jump on board that same train. When Bluefire was built, the concept was indeed similar to coasters like Maverick at Cedar Point. However, that doesn't mean that Bluefire is a complete rip-off. Far from it really. The coaster has a decently unique layout that involves a very odd turnaround, as well as a mix of elements not seen on similar models. Therefore, Bluefire will still earn a score of 4. No more, no less. Our final category is perhaps the most important: overall fun. When you ride a roller coaster, you obviously hope to have fun on the ride. After all, that's the whole point, unless you're just going for credits. Luckily, Bluefire Megacoaster does not fail to deliver. While it does have its downs, it very much has its ups as well. And I think this is a very fun roller coaster. From the whippy inversions to the near misses and the theming, you are guaranteed to at least like Bluefire. And in my personal experience, I reckon a score of 8 is fitting for how much fun I had on this ride. I love the launch, I had fun on every inversion, even the weaker vertical loop which was made up for by the restraints, and the overall twists and head choppers really gave the ride bonus points for how fun it was. Our final score is the average of the 7 already given scores, and it hits a solid 7, which I think is perfect. It is far from a perfect thrill coaster, but I also don't think it's an average ride at all. I expected this to be an underwhelming experience like the Monon at my home park Tivoli Gardens, but it can't even be compared. Already from the surprising launch to the overall fun and different layout, this coaster manages to be one of my personal favorite launch coasters I have ridden. One last thing I want to mention before ending the video is that if you're going to Europa-Park, I highly recommend using the normal queue line for Bluefire. While the coaster does have a single rider line, I unfortunately made a mistake going into it. When I rode it for the first time, the normal queue was 40 minutes long, and the single rider was so short it was almost in its station itself. However, I quickly found out that they almost never let anyone from the single rider line in, and I ended up waiting 45 minutes in a relatively short line before storming out, where I ended up going into the normal queue. I wasted 45 minutes of my day being frustrated in a queue I never got through, so for your own sake, do not use Bluefire's single rider line. Now, I'm not sure if it's the same with the other coasters at the park, but just in case, stay away from Europa-Park's single rider lines. Their operations might be some of the best in the world, and they really are incredible, but going into the single rider queue is pretty much wasting good time you could have spent on maybe more than one on the roller coaster besides the one you're in line for. That has been it for today's review of my first MACK Rides Launch Coaster, Bluefire Megacoaster. If you've ridden it, I would love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below. Also, remember to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video and would like to show your support. And if you want to see more, don't hesitate to hit subscribe to be notified whenever new content hits my channel. Otherwise, it has been Northern Rides, and I hope you all keep on riding.